The outsider's echo. Octavia Reeves adjusted her emerald dress for the third time, wondering if the second-hand gown betrayed her as an imposter. Among the glittering elite at the annual Global Conservation Gala, the Westbrook Hotel ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers reflecting off-diamond necklaces and designer watches, a stark contrast to her usual attire of soil-stained field clothes and sturdy boots. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, clutching her small beaded purse. Inside was a worn photograph of her grandmother, standing proudly beside her community garden, the reason Octavia had dedicated her life to preserving endangered plant species in forgotten corners of the world. The invitation had arrived unexpectedly 3 weeks ago. Her research on indigenous medicinal plants had caught someone's attention, earning her a nomination for the Rising Conservationist Award. Despite her department head's insistence that she attend, Octavia felt like a wildflower in a carefully manicured garden. "Would you like some champagne, ma'am?" A server approached with a silver tray. "No, thank you." She smiled politely, knowing alcohol would only amplify her anxiety. What she needed was fresh air, not bubbles. Octavia drifted toward the terrace doors, navigating between conversations about summer homes in Monaco and private conservation projects funded by family fortunes. Each exchange she overheard reinforced her conviction that she didn't belong in this world of inherited privilege and effortless connections. The cool evening air embraced her as she stepped onto the marble terrace. Below, the city lights mimicked the stars above, both equally distant and indifferent to her presence. She leaned against the stone balustrade, remembering the simplicity of nights spent collecting nocturnal plant samples in the Amazon, where worth was measured by knowledge and respect, not designer labels. "You look like you're plotting an escape." The voice beside her was warm, tinged with amusement. Octavia turned to find a man in his late 30s watching her with curious hazel eyes. His black suit was well-tailored but not ostentatious, and unlike most men inside, he wore no flashy accessories beyond a simple wooden lapel pin shaped like a leaf. "Is it that obvious?" she asked, unable to suppress a small smile. "Only to another escape artist." He extended his hand. "I'm Benjamin Hammond." The name registered immediately. Benjamin Hammond of Hammond Conservation Trust, one of the most influential environmental organizations in the country. She'd cited his foundation's research in her papers countless times. "Octavia Reeves," she replied, suddenly conscious of her calloused hands against his smooth palm. "I work with the International Plant Rescue Initiative," he finished. "Your work with the indigenous communities in Peru saved 17 plant species from extinction last year. That's why I nominated you." Her surprise must have shown clearly on her face because he laughed, a genuine sound that seemed out of place among the practiced socialite chuckles inside. "You nominated me? But why?" "My work is so small-scale compared to what your foundation accomplishes." Benjamin leaned against the balustrade beside her, looking out at the city. "Scale isn't everything, Dr. Reeves. Impact is." He paused, studying her profile. "And sometimes the people making the biggest difference are the ones who never enter ballrooms like this." A comfortable silence settled between them, interrupted only by the distant melody of the string quartet inside. For the first time that evening, Octavia felt the knot in her stomach begin to loosen. "The truth is," Benjamin said finally, his voice lower, more personal, "I've been hoping to meet you for a long time." Octavia turned, puzzled. "Me? Why?" His expression shifted to something more complex, nostalgia perhaps, or reverence. "Because 3 years ago you did something remarkable that changed everything for my family. And tonight, I finally have the chance to thank you." Before he could elaborate, the announcement for dinner chimed through the ballroom. Benjamin straightened, offering his arm with a gentle smile that seemed to bridge their different worlds. "Would you join me at my table, Dr. Reeves? I believe we have quite a story to unravel." As Octavia placed her hand tentatively on his arm, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into a narrative much larger than herself, one where perhaps, against all expectations, she belonged after all. Fragments of recognition. Benjamin Hammond couldn't focus on the gala host's welcoming speech. His attention remained fixed on the woman seated beside him, her fingers occasionally brushing the stem of her water glass, as if reassuring herself it was real. Octavia Reeves, brilliant botanist, reluctant award nominee, and completely unaware of how she had altered the course of his life. The memory surfaced with perfect clarity. A rain-soaked afternoon in Lima 3 years ago. His grandfather Thomas lying unconscious in a small medical clinic after a stroke. 70 years of botanical knowledge and undocumented research about to vanish forever. Benjamin had arrived too late, desperate and grief-stricken, only to discover that someone had already stepped in. The first course will be served shortly, the waiter announced, interrupting Benjamin's thoughts. Would either of you prefer the vegetarian option? Yes, please, Octavia responded, the first words she'd spoken since they'd sat down. Benjamin nodded his agreement, then turned toward her. You're uncomfortable here, it wasn't a question. Her emerald dress, though elegant, lacked the designer labels worn by others. Her single piece of jewelry, a pendant with a pressed wildflower, encased in resin, spoke of sentimentality rather than status. These events aren't my natural habitat, she admitted with a self-deprecating smile. I'm more at home knee-deep in a peat bog than navigating cocktail conversations. A preference I share, Benjamin replied. Though I've had to adapt. Fundraising requires playing the game. Curiosity flickered across her face. You mentioned your family earlier. Something I did? Benjamin carefully unfolded his napkin. How to explain without overwhelming her. The story spanned continents and decades, from his grandfather's controversial theories about indigenous plant knowledge to the expedition that nearly cost Thomas Hammond his life. My grandfather was Thomas Hammond, he began, watching for recognition. It came immediately, her eyes widening. The ethnobotanist. His work on symbiotic relationships between rainforest fungi and medicinal plants is groundbreaking. I've built much of my research on his foundation. The same, Benjamin confirmed, pleased by her genuine admiration. 3 years ago, he suffered a severe stroke while documenting plant specimens in Peru. He was carrying 60 years of handwritten field notes, irreplaceable observations never formally published. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of heirloom vegetables harvested from sustainable farms. Benjamin waited until the servers retreated before continuing. When I arrived at the clinic, I expected the worst. Instead, I found a young American botanist who had not only arranged for his medical care, but had meticulously preserved and organized all his rain-damaged notes. He met her gaze directly. That botanist was you, Dr. Reeves. Octavia's fork paused midway to her mouth. That was your grandfather? I had no idea. She set down her utensil. He was wearing a wedding ring with unusual engravings, plant motifs. I recognized the field journal format immediately. When the nurses couldn't locate family contacts, I couldn't just leave his life's work to be discarded. Around them, the gala continued, laughter and strategic networking filling the air with practiced ease. Yet at their table existed a different reality, an island of authentic connection amid social performance. You stayed with him for 3 days, Benjamin said softly. The clinic staff told me you worked through nights, drying pages, transcribing damaged sections, creating preservation systems. A flush colored her cheeks. Anyone in my position would have done the same. But they didn't. You did. Benjamin's voice carried an intensity that surprised even him. What you couldn't have known was that my grandfather regained consciousness briefly on the 3rd day. Before I arrived, he told the nurse that a guardian angel had been sent to protect his legacy. Octavia's expression softened. I'm glad he knew his work was safe. How is he now? The question Benjamin had been anticipating. He passed away 6 months later, but because of you, his final research was preserved. The Hammond Foundation has since established 3 conservation programs based on his methodologies. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a small leather-bound book. This is why I've been searching for you, Dr. Reeves. My grandfather left this with instructions it should go to the young botanist with gentle hands and fierce determination. The notebook's cover bore a simple embossed leaf design, the same pattern as Benjamin's wooden lapel pin. As he placed it on the table between them, the weight of its significance created a private gravity field that seemed to exclude the glittering chaos of the gala. I don't understand, Octavia whispered. Why would he leave something for me? We never even spoke. Benjamin smiled, remembering his grandfather's intuitive understanding of people and plants alike. Thomas believed in cosmic reciprocity. He felt you were meant to continue aspects of his work that I cannot. Their conversation paused as servers cleared the first course. Benjamin observed how Octavia's fingers hovered near the notebook without touching it, reverent, hesitant, perhaps overwhelmed by its implications. The Rising Conservationist nomination wasn't just about your work in Peru, Benjamin admitted. It was the only way I could guarantee finding you. You've been remarkably difficult to track down, Dr. Reeves. 3 expedition changes in 2 years, no social media presence. A genuine laugh escaped her. When you're following flowering cycles in remote locations, Instagram updates aren't exactly a priority. For the first time that evening, Benjamin felt the tension in his shoulders release. This woman who had preserved his family's legacy wasn't intimidated by its significance. She was simply processing how unexpectedly their paths had converged. "Whatever's in that notebook," Octavia said carefully, "I'm honored by your grandfather's trust, but I'm just a field researcher with limited resources." Benjamin leaned forward slightly. "Resources can be arranged. What can't be replicated is your approach. The same intuition that led you to save a stranger's life work." As the main course arrived, Benjamin watched Octavia finally touch the notebook's cover, her fingers tracing the embossed leaf with the same care she likely showed the endangered plants she protected. "I came tonight to find the woman who preserved my grandfather's legacy," Benjamin said quietly. "Instead, I've discovered she might also be the key to its future." Converging paths. The gala's artificial opulence faded into the background as Octavia carefully opened Thomas Hammond's leather notebook. The pages inside weren't filled with text as she'd expected, but with intricate botanical illustrations, each accompanied by precise geographical coordinates and cryptic annotations. Some pages contained pressed specimens so delicate they seemed to breathe between the paper. "These are," Octavia whispered, her scientific mind racing to catalog what she was seeing. "Unknown species," Benjamin finished, his voice low with reverence, "at least to Western science. My grandfather believed they represented a botanical bridge, plants that indigenous healers have used for generations, but that have never been documented in conventional research." A server approached their table, but Benjamin discreetly waved him away. Around them the gala continued. Awards were announced. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Champagne flowed. Yet Octavia and Benjamin remained cocooned in their private revelation. "This one," Octavia pointed to a detailed drawing of a star-shaped flower with unusual vascular patterns, "appears to be a variant of Passiflora, but these adaptations shouldn't be possible in the documented habitat." She glanced up at Benjamin, excitement overriding her earlier discomfort. "Where was this found?" "That's the complexity of my grandfather's final expedition. He was working in a transitional zone between the Amazon, rainforest and the eastern Andean slopes, an area rapidly disappearing due to illegal mining. Operations, the implications settled between them like a physical presence. These weren't merely academic discoveries. They were disappearing knowledge, evolutionary marvels on the brink of extinction before they'd even been named." "Dr. Reeves," a voice interrupted their bubble. Both looked up to find a tuxedo-clad man with a practiced smile. "The committee requires all nominees on stage for the final award presentation." Octavia hesitated, glancing at Benjamin, reluctant to break their connection. He nodded encouragingly. "Go, your work deserves recognition. We have time." As she followed the coordinator toward the stage, Octavia felt strangely disembodied, her physical form moving through social protocols while her mind remained with the notebook and its extraordinary implications. The stage lights were blinding, the applause distant and hollow compared to the electric realization of what Thomas Hammond had entrusted to her. The host's voice echoed through the ballroom. "Our next award celebrates innovation in conservation methodologies. The nominees have each demonstrated exceptional commitment to preserving our planet's biodiversity." From the stage, Octavia scanned the crowd until she found Benjamin. Unlike the others at his table who were engaged in side conversations, his attention remained completely focused on her, not with the evaluating gaze of the other judges, but with something more profound: recognition, partnership, possibility. And the Rising Conservationist Award goes to Dr. Octavia Reeves for her groundbreaking work integrating indigenous knowledge systems with modern conservation practices. The announcement barely registered as Octavia mechanically accepted the crystal trophy and murmured appropriate thanks. The words she truly needed to say weren't meant for this audience of wealthy donors and institutional representatives. They were meant for the man who had brought her grandfather's legacy full circle. 20 minutes later, they stood together on a different terrace, this one on the hotel's rooftop garden. Away from the gala's performative networking, the city sprawled below them, a concrete counterpoint to the wild places they both fought to protect. "Congratulations," Benjamin said, indicating the award she still clutched, "though I suspect that pales in comparison to what you've discovered tonight." Octavia placed the trophy on a nearby table, a beautiful paperweight that might help secure my next research grant, she acknowledged with a small smile. "But you're right. This connection to your grandfather's work." She shook her head, still processing. "It feels predetermined somehow." Benjamin leaned against the railing. "My grandfather would say there are no coincidences in nature. Every relationship serves a purpose, whether we immediately understand it or not. Like mycorrhizal networks," Octavia suggested. "Seemingly separate organisms underground, actually connected through invisible systems of mutual support." "Exactly." Benjamin's expression softened. "You truly speak his language." The night air carried the scent of the rooftop garden's rosemary and lavender, a domesticated hint of the wild botanical worlds they both treasured. Octavia felt a strange harmony settling within her, the dissonance of the evening resolving into something unexpected but right. "There's more to the story," Benjamin said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "The notebook contains locations of plants with potentially revolutionary properties, but accessing these areas requires navigating complicated territory, both geographically and politically." Octavia nodded slowly, understanding the layers of his statement. "Conservation always involves human systems as much as ecological ones. The Hammond Foundation has been trying to establish a protected research corridor in the region, but we've encountered resistance from multiple interests: pharmaceutical companies wanting unregulated access, local officials susceptible to bribes, even some academic institutions seeking to claim discoveries." The familiar frustration of conservation politics settled in Octavia's chest. No matter how pure the scientific mission, human complications always intervened. "What exactly are you proposing, Benjamin?" He turned to face her directly, moonlight illuminating the earnestness in his expression. "A partnership. Your field expertise and connections with indigenous communities combined with the Hammond Foundation's resources and political leverage." Octavia weighed his words carefully. "And your grandfather's notebook would guide our research priorities?" "It would be our compass, yes." Benjamin stepped closer. "But this isn't just about scientific discovery, Octavia. It's about completing a circle that began when you saved my grandfather's legacy without knowing who he was." The use of her first name shifted, something between them, professional admiration, warming into personal connection. Standing there in her borrowed finery, award in hand, Octavia realized the evening had transformed her in ways no gala or recognition ever could. 3 years ago, "I was just doing what seemed right in the moment," she said softly. "I never imagined it would lead to this." Benjamin's smile deepened, creating faint lines around his eyes that spoke of genuine emotion rarely displayed in his public role. "Perhaps that's the definition of destiny, moments of instinctive kindness that ripple outward in ways we can't predict." Below them, guests began departing from the gala, diamonds and tailored suits disappearing into luxury vehicles. Above, stars punctuated the night sky, the same stars that had guided both their separate journeys to this unexpected intersection. "I should warn you," Octavia said, a new confidence threading through her voice. "I don't navigate Foundation politics well. I speak too directly and prioritize plants over people's feelings." Benjamin laughed, a rich, unguarded sound that seemed to bridge their different worlds. "Precisely why my grandfather chose you. The Hammond Foundation has enough diplomats. What we need is your uncompromising clarity." He extended his hand, not in the formal greeting they'd shared earlier, but as a genuine offer of partnership. "What do you say, Dr. Reeves? Shall we discover what Thomas Hammond intended for us to find together?" As Octavia placed her hand in his, the award ceremony, the gala's superficial glamour and her earlier insecurities faded into irrelevance. In their place stood something far more valuable, a path forward that honored both science and serendipity, evidence and intuition, past and future. "Yes," she answered simply. "I believe we shall." Seeds of truth morning sunlight streamed through the Hammond Foundation's glass-walled conference room, as Octavia spread Thomas Hammond's notebook across the polished table. 2 weeks had passed since the gala, 14 days of rapid transition from her modest university lab to this sleek headquarters overlooking the city's botanical gardens. These specimens correspond to locations spanning 3 different ecological zones, she explained, pointing to her digital map where she'd plotted the coordinates from Thomas's notes. The pattern suggests he was tracking plant migrations possibly driven by climate shifts. Across the table, Eleonora Whitaker, the Foundation's senior research director, examined the data with narrowed eyes. Her steel gray hair and impeccable blazer projected institutional authority, a stark contrast to Octavia's practical field clothes and unadorned presentation style. Fascinating theory, Dr. Reeves, Eleonora said coolly. But the board requires more substantial evidence before approving an expedition of this magnitude, especially with the political complications in the northern region. Benjamin, seated at the head of the table, intervened. My grandfather's research has proven reliable in every previous instance. If Thomas believed these species exist, the evidence warrants investigation. The tension between institutional caution and scientific exploration, a familiar dynamic in conservation work, filled the room. Octavia had encountered this resistance throughout her career, though usually from university bureaucrats with much smaller budgets, not from an organization supposedly dedicated to botanical discovery. Perhaps, Eleonora suggested with practiced diplomacy, we should first verify these findings through satellite imagery and existing research databases before committing resources. Octavia suppressed her frustration. With respect, Dr. Whitaker, many of these species wouldn't be visible via satellite, and they don't exist in conventional databases. That's precisely what makes Thomas's work so valuable. The door opened as Eleonora prepared her rebuttal. Dominic Foster, the Foundation's governmental liaison, entered with a tablet in hand and concern etched across his features. Sorry to interrupt, he said, nodding to Benjamin, but we've received troubling news. Vermilion Resource Extraction has filed permits for exploratory operations in 2 of our target zones. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Vermilion, a multinational mining corporation with a devastating environmental record, represented everything the Hammond Foundation opposed. How? Benjamin demanded, rising from his chair. Those areas were under preliminary protection status through our agreement with the Environmental Ministry. Dominic grimaced. Apparently, the ministry's jurisdiction has been challenged. Vermilion claims the land contains critical minerals necessary for national security projects. Octavia watched as Benjamin's professional composure momentarily faltered, revealing a flash of the personal stake beneath his leadership role. This wasn't merely an academic setback. It was a threat to his grandfather's legacy. Timeline? Benjamin asked, his voice controlled once more. Operations could begin within 60 days unless legally challenged. The implications crystallized in Octavia's mind with devastating clarity. If Vermilion began mining operations, the undiscovered species in Thomas's notebook might be destroyed before they could even be documented. Evolutionary marvels lost forever. We need to expedite everything, she said, turning to Benjamin, not just for research purposes but for legal protection. If we can document these species, especially any with potential medical applications, we can file for biodiversity preservation status. Eleonora raised an elegant eyebrow. You're suggesting we abandon proper protocols and rush into the field based on unverified notes? I'm suggesting, Octavia countered firmly, that sometimes conservation requires calculated risks. These plants have potentially survived for millennia. They might not survive another 2 months of corporate bureaucracy. Benjamin studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. Octavia's right. We'll split our approach. Dominic, engage our legal team to challenge the permits directly. Eleonora, prepare the Foundation for accelerated research validation protocols. He turned to Octavia. And you and I will begin preliminary field assessment immediately. Eleonora's expression tightened. Benjamin, may I speak with you privately? After they stepped outside, Octavia remained at the table, fingers tracing the delicate illustrations in Thomas's notebook. Through the glass walls, she could see Benjamin and Eleonora engaged in intense conversation, the older woman gesturing emphatically while Benjamin listened with rigid posture. Dominic, still in the room, cleared his throat. Don't take Eleonora's resistance personally, he offered. She's been with the Foundation since Thomas's day. Very protective of his legacy. Protective enough to risk losing what he discovered? Octavia asked. Dominic's expression turned thoughtful. The Hammond Foundation walks a complex line between scientific idealism and practical reality. Benjamin understands this better than anyone. He paused. Though he's different since meeting you. More like his grandfather. Willing to challenge established procedures when something matters enough. Before Octavia could respond, Benjamin returned alone, his expression unreadable. We leave for the first site tomorrow morning, he announced. Eleonora will coordinate from headquarters. Just like that? Octavia asked, surprised by the sudden decision. A hint of a smile crossed his face. I may run the Foundation now, but I started as a field researcher. Some questions can only be answered by getting your hands in the soil. 48 hours later, Octavia stood in a remote clearing at the edge of the cloud forest. Morning mist curling around ancient trees draped with epiphytes. The journey had required a commercial flight followed by a smaller charter plane, then hours in a rugged vehicle navigating deteriorating roads, and finally a hike through dense undergrowth. According to the coordinates, Benjamin said, consulting his GPS unit, we should find the first specimen approximately 200 meters northwest, near a limestone outcropping. They moved carefully through the forest, each step measured to minimize disturbance. Despite the professional nature of their expedition, Octavia couldn't help noticing how naturally Benjamin moved through the environment. Not with the tentative caution of an administrator, but with the respectful confidence of someone who understood ecological relationships. You've done extensive fieldwork, she observed as he effortlessly identified a rare orchid species they passed. Before the Foundation became my primary responsibility? Yes. His voice carried a note of wistfulness. My grandfather believed administrative work was necessary but insufficient. Never trust a conservationist with clean fingernails, he used to say. The limestone formation emerged through the mist, a weathered sentinel standing guard over the forest floor. According to Thomas's notes, they should find a small plant with distinctive red-veined leaves growing in the rock's shadow. There, Octavia whispered, spotting the delicate foliage exactly where Thomas had indicated. She knelt beside it, her trained eye confirming what the notebook had suggested. This was a previously undocumented species, a botanical missing link between two known families. Benjamin crouched beside her, their shoulders nearly touching as they examined the remarkable plant. He was right, he murmured, voice thick with emotion. After all this time, the intimacy of the moment, their shared wonder at this living testament to Thomas Hammond's vision, created a connection deeper than their professional partnership. For a botanist who had spent years explaining the importance of plant diversity to indifferent audiences, finding someone who intrinsically understood its value felt like coming home. Octavia carefully photographed and collected a minimal sample, following ethical research protocols. As she worked, Benjamin received a satellite call that pulled him several paces away. When he returned, his expression had darkened considerably. Vermilion has accelerated their timeline, he said. The forest's tranquility shattered by corporate machinations. They've somehow secured emergency approval for preliminary survey work to begin next week. But that's impossible, Octavia protested. The environmental impact assessments alone should take months. Benjamin's jaw tightened. Apparently, significant donations to certain officials' charitable foundations have expedited the process. The revelation hung between them, the familiar story of environmental protection undermined by financial influence. Yet this wasn't just another abstract conservation battle. It was personal now, tied to Thomas's legacy and their emerging partnership. What about the other locations? Octavia asked, her mind racing through possibilities. If we can document enough species to establish this as a biodiversity hotspot. That's just it, Benjamin interrupted, frustration evident in his voice. Eleonora called an emergency board meeting while we were in transit. They voted to pursue the legal challenge exclusively rather than continuing our field research. The implications struck Octavia like a physical blow. They're abandoning the scientific documentation? But that's our strongest argument for protection. The board considers it too high risk now that Vermilion has accelerated their timeline. They believe our resources are better directed toward political and legal channels. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the calls of distant birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. The forest continued its ancient rhythms, oblivious to human decisions that might determine its fate. "What do you believe, Benjamin?" Octavia finally asked, studying his troubled expression. He met her gaze directly. "I believe my grandfather entrusted his discoveries to you for a reason. And I believe some truths can only be found by looking where others won't." The weight of his words settled between them, not just their literal meaning, but the deeper implication. This wasn't merely about professional disagreement. It was about fundamental values and the courage to act on them. "The board has ordered us to return immediately," Benjamin continued, his voice lowered, despite their isolation, "to focus on the legal strategy and public relations campaign." Octavia stood, brushing soil from her knees, the precious plant sample secured in her collection case. "And if we don't? If we continue to the remaining sites first?" A complex emotion flickered across Benjamin's face. Uncertainty battling with resolve, institutional responsibility warring with personal conviction. For the first time, Octavia glimpsed the full weight he carried as Thomas Hammond's grandson and heir. "Then I would be defying my board and risking my position," he said slowly. "But I would be honoring my grandfather's legacy in the way that matters most." The forest seemed to hold its breath around them. Two people standing at the intersection of institutional power, scientific discovery, and personal integrity. Through the canopy above, shafts of sunlight illuminated particles of life suspended in the air, the invisible interconnectedness that both had dedicated their lives to protecting. "What do we do now?" Octavia asked softly, though she already sensed his answer. Benjamin's gaze traveled from the plant they'd discovered to the vastness of the forest beyond, the known and the undiscovered existing in perfect balance. Then he looked back at her, his decision evident in his eyes. "We follow the path Thomas left for us," he said simply, "and we trust that truth, properly documented, still has power in this world." As they gathered their equipment to continue deeper into the forest rather than returning as ordered, Octavia realized that their expedition had transformed into something more significant than scientific documentation. It had become a testament to what people could accomplish when they valued discovery over comfort, truth over convenience, and courage over compliance. The seeds of something profound had been planted between them, not just a professional alliance or personal connection, but a shared commitment to seeing the world as it truly was, and fighting for what it could become. Roots of Tomorrow. 3 months later, Octavia stood before the International Biodiversity Council in Geneva, her field-worn hands steady as she presented the final slide of her presentation. The chamber, filled with conservation leaders, government representatives, and corporate stakeholders, remained silent as the image appeared, a panoramic photograph of a previously undocumented ecological transition zone where 7 of Thomas Hammond's predicted species now thrived in a protected sanctuary. In conclusion, she stated with quiet confidence, the Hammond-Reeves Biodiversity Corridor represents not just the preservation of newly discovered species, but a new model for conservation, one that integrates indigenous knowledge, corporate responsibility, and scientific discovery in sustainable balance. As measured applause filled the chamber, Octavia caught Benjamin's eye from his seat in the front row. His subtle nod carried the weight of their shared journey, the challenges overcome, the risks taken, and the unexpected victory they'd achieved against formidable odds. The council chairwoman, Dr. Natalia Volkov, adjusted her microphone. "Thank you, Dr. Reeves. The council acknowledges the Hammond Foundation's extraordinary work in establishing this protected zone." She glanced at her notes.
"However, we must address the
unconventional methods employed during your research phase. Representatives from Vermilion Resource Extraction have raised concerns about procedural irregularities." From the corporate section, Vincent Harrington of Vermilion rose. His tailored suit and practiced smile couldn't disguise the frustration simmering beneath his professional demeanor. "While we commend the scientific discoveries," he began with careful diplomacy, "we must note that Dr. Reeves and Mr. Hammond continued their field research against the explicit direction of the Hammond Foundation's Board of Directors. This raises questions about the legitimacy of their findings and the subsequent protected status designation." The chamber stirred with murmurs. Octavia maintained her composure, though her heart raced. This was the confrontation they had anticipated, the final attempt by Vermilion to undermine their achievement, and regain access to the mineral-rich lands now under protection. Before she could respond, Benjamin stood. The past months had changed him subtly but significantly. The polished Foundation director had given way to something more authentic, a conservationist whose administrative skills served his deeper purpose, rather than defining it. "If I may address this concern," he said, his voice carrying natural authority. "When my grandfather established the Hammond Foundation, he included a founding principle that scientific truth must sometimes transcend institutional procedure. Dr. Reeves and I made the decision to complete our documentation precisely because we understood the urgent threat posed by accelerated mining operations." He paused, surveying the chamber. "As for the board's directives, I remind the council that upon our return with irrefutable evidence of multiple undocumented species, the board unanimously ratified our actions and supported the protection petition. The minutes of that meeting have been included in your briefing materials." Dr. Volkov nodded. "So noted, Mr. Hammond. Does Vermilion wish to present substantive scientific objections to the findings themselves?" Harrington's smile tightened. "Not at this time. But Vermilion maintains that areas adjacent to the protected corridor should remain available for responsible resource development. The council will take all positions under advisement," Dr. Volkov concluded. "We will reconvene tomorrow for final determinations." As the session adjourned, Octavia gathered her materials, aware of the approaching footsteps behind her. She turned to find Eleonora Whitaker, whose initial skepticism had transformed into grudging respect over the intervening months. "Impressive presentation, Dr. Reeves," Eleonora said, her formal tone softened by genuine admiration. "Thomas would have been proud to see his work validated so thoroughly." "Thank you," Octavia replied, recognizing the significance of Eleonora's acknowledgement. "Though I believe he would give most of the credit to the plants. Themselves, they've been quietly evolving solutions, while we humans debated their importance." A smile flickered across Eleonora's composed features. "Perhaps that's why he chose you. You speak of plants as colleagues rather than subjects." She glanced toward Benjamin, who was engaged in conversation with several council members. "You've changed him, you know." Reminded him of who he was before administrative responsibilities took precedence. Before Octavia could respond, Eleonora continued, her voice lowered. "The board meets next week to discuss succession planning. Benjamin has proposed significant structural changes, including a new co-directorship model that would balance field research with administrative oversight. The implication hung between them, neither woman needing to articulate it further. With a knowing nod, Eleonora departed, leaving Octavia to process this unexpected development. Outside the United Nations complex, Geneva's autumn painted the landscape in amber and gold. Octavia found Benjamin waiting beside Lake Geneva, his attention fixed on a family of swans navigating the clear waters. "Eleonora seems to have made peace with our rebellion," she observed, joining him at the railing. "More than peace," Benjamin replied. "She's become our strongest advocate on the board. Apparently, success has a way of reframing reckless defiance as visionary leadership." They shared a knowing smile, comfortable in the easy companionship that had developed during their weeks in the field, sleeping in remote research stations, navigating treacherous terrain, and documenting Thomas's discoveries one by one. What had begun as a professional partnership had evolved into something neither had anticipated, but both now recognized as essential. "She mentioned your proposal to the board," Octavia said carefully. "About the co-directorship." Benjamin turned to face her fully. "I was going to discuss that with you after the council's final decision. The Hammond Foundation needs to evolve. My grandfather understood that conservation requires both political, navigation, and scientific groundwork. But no single person can excel at both simultaneously, and you believe I could provide the scientific counterweight to your political acumen?" Octavia asked, though she already knew his answer. "I believe we've already proven what we can accomplish together." His gaze held hers steadily. "The question is whether you want to leave your university position for something more complicated." The lake breeze carried the scent of water and distant mountains, so different from the humid richness of the forests where they'd made their discoveries, yet somehow appropriate for this moment of transition. I've spent my career fighting for resources and recognition, Octavia reflected. Always the outsider trying to convince others why botanical preservation matters. The thought of working from a position of institutional support is almost disorienting. If it helps, Benjamin offered with gentle humor, I suspect you'll still find plenty to fight for even from within the Foundation. True change rarely comes without resistance even among allies. A comfortable silence settled between them as Octavia considered the unexpected path her life had taken since that gala night 3 months ago. She had arrived feeling like an imposter in a world of privilege and influence. Now she stood as a recognized authority, having helped secure protection for species that might otherwise have vanished unknown. There's something else we should discuss, Benjamin said finally, his tone shifting to something more personal, something beyond professional considerations. Octavia felt a flutter of anticipation. Their connection had deepened during their expedition in ways neither had openly acknowledged. Shared moments of wonder at botanical discoveries, late-night conversations about conservation philosophy, the gradual dismantling of the boundaries between colleagues, and something more profound. I'm listening, she encouraged when he hesitated. Benjamin reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box with the now familiar leaf emblem carved into its lid. My grandfather believed that certain relationships in nature exist for reasons beyond immediate understanding, that connections form because they serve essential purposes in the larger ecosystem. He opened the box to reveal not jewelry as Octavia had momentarily expected, but a small, perfectly preserved seed encased in clear resin, similar to her wildflower pendant, but with unmistakable significance. This is from the first plant species we documented together, Benjamin explained, the one growing exactly where Thomas predicted against all probability. Octavia recognized it immediately, the distinctive pattern unmistakable to her trained eye. The keystone species that led us to everything else. Exactly. Benjamin's expression softened with emotion rarely displayed in professional settings. I've been thinking about what brought us together, how you preserved my grandfather's work without knowing its significance, how I searched for you without understanding why it mattered so deeply. Like that plant growing precisely where it belonged despite all environmental challenges. He offered her the box. Whatever you decide about the Foundation position, I wanted you to have this. A reminder that sometimes the most important connections aren't planned or engineered. They simply grow where they're meant to be. Octavia accepted the gift. Understanding its significance went far beyond professional recognition. The seed represented not just their scientific achievement, but the organic development of something neither had been seeking yet both now treasured. 3 months ago, I believed I didn't belong in your world, she said softly. Now I'm helping shape it. Perhaps we've created a new world altogether, Benjamin suggested, one that honors tradition while embracing discovery. Institutional strength supporting scientific courage. The afternoon sun caught the resin pendant, sending prisms of light dancing across their hands, a miniature illustration of how their separate paths had refracted into something unexpected and beautiful. The board meeting isn't until next week, Octavia noted, a smile playing at her lips, and the council's final decision comes tomorrow. True, Benjamin acknowledged. Why do you mention it? Because, she replied, closing her fingers around the seed pendant, I believe we should follow your grandfather's example one more time. Which is? To make decisions based on what we know to be true, rather than waiting for official validation. Her eyes met his with newfound certainty. Yes to the Foundation position, yes to the co-directorship, and yes to exploring whatever else is growing between, professionally and personally. Benjamin's expression brightened with genuine joy that transcended the measured satisfaction of their conservation victory. Thomas always said the most important discoveries happen when you're willing to step beyond established boundaries. A philosophy that applies to more than botany, it seems, Octavia observed. As they stood together beside Lake Geneva, the late afternoon light illuminated a world of possibilities neither could have imagined on that gala night. Months before, what had begun with a sense of not belonging had transformed into the profound recognition that sometimes belonging isn't about fitting into existing structures, but about creating new ones where authentic connection can flourish. Behind them, the United Nations buildings stood as monuments to human collaboration, Before them, the natural world continued its ancient rhythms of adaptation and renewal, and between them grew the certainty that their unexpected connection, like the remarkable plants they had discovered together, existed for reasons that transcended coincidence. "I believe," Benjamin said softly, taking her hand in his, "that this is exactly where we're meant to be." Octavia nodded, no longer the outsider, but a woman who had found her rightful place, not by conforming to others' expectations, but by following her truest instincts through uncertainty toward something genuine and lasting. "It appears," she replied with quiet confidence, "that we belong after all." The seed pendant caught the light once more, a small miracle preserved in resin, a testament to discovery, persistence, and the unexpected ways in which separate paths converge to create something both beautiful and necessary in a world that desperately needed both.